There is a quiet conversation happening inside you, even now. It speaks in patterns, not words. In reactions, not choices. You begin to notice that your life is not random, but repeated. And in that realization, something awakens, something that has always been watching. There is something happening inside you right now, something so constant, so familiar, that you have almost never questioned it. It does not speak loudly. It does not ask for permission. And yet, it shapes nearly everything you feel, think, and do. You wake up with certain thoughts already waiting. You react to situations in ways that feel automatic. You feel emotions rise before you can explain them. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispers, "This is just who I am." But what if it isn't? What if the patterns you call yourself are not truly you, but something you have been running for years without realizing it? Pause for a moment. Think about how often your day repeats itself, not in events, but in reactions. The same hesitation when facing something new. The same doubt when opportunity appears. The same inner resistance that pulls you back into what is familiar, even when you want something different. It feels natural. It feels justified. It feels real. But it is also predictable. And anything predictable inside the human mind is not random. It is programmed. This is where the realization begins. There is a system within you, a silent, powerful system that has been collecting instructions for years. Not through conscious decision, but through repetition, emotion, and experience. Every time you believed something about yourself, it was recorded. Every time you felt fear and stepped back, it was reinforced. Every time you doubted your ability, it became a little more permanent. You did not choose it deliberately. You absorbed it. Like a sponge that never learned to filter, your mind took in everything: words, reactions, failures, expectations, and slowly turned them into patterns. And those patterns became your reality. This is why sometimes you feel stuck, even when you want to move forward. This is why motivation fades, even when desire is strong. This is why change feels difficult, even when you know exactly what to do. Because you are not just acting with your conscious mind. You are operating through a deeper layer, a silent script running beneath your awareness. And here is the most important truth you are beginning to see. You are not consciously choosing most of your life. You are repeating it. Not because you are weak. Not because you lack discipline. But because your mind has been conditioned to follow what it already knows. Familiarity feels safe. Even when it limits you. So you stay within invisible boundaries. Boundaries that feel like personality, but are actually patterns. You tell yourself stories. I'm not confident. I always fail at this. I can't change. And each time you repeat them, even silently, they sink deeper into the system. Until one day, they stop feeling like thoughts. And start feeling like truth. But right now, something is shifting. You are noticing it. And awareness is where everything begins. Because the moment you observe a pattern, you create distance from it. The moment you say, "This is happening inside me," instead of "This is who I am," you break the illusion. You separate yourself from the program. This is subtle, but powerful. Imagine your mind as a vast operating system. For years, it has been running scripts automatically, lines of code written through repetition and emotion. You never questioned the code. You simply experienced the output. But now, you are looking at it. You are seeing the reactions before they fully take over. You are noticing the thoughts as they arise. You are becoming aware of the patterns that once felt invisible. And in that awareness, something extraordinary happens. You pause. Even if just for a second. And in that second, you are no longer fully controlled. You begin to sense that there is a part of you that is not reactive. A part that is watching, observing, understanding. This part has always been there. Quiet. Patient. Uninvolved in the chaos of automatic thinking. But it was buried beneath layers of conditioning. Now, it is rising. And as it rises, the old patterns begin to lose their grip, not because they are gone, but because they are being seen. You start to notice how certain thoughts lead to certain emotions. How certain emotions lead to certain behaviors. How the cycle repeats, again and again. Thought. Emotion. Reaction. Loop. This loop has been shaping your life. But here is the shift. If the loop can be observed, it can be changed. Not by force. Not by fighting your thoughts. But by understanding the mechanism behind them. Your subconscious mind does not judge. It does not analyze. It simply accepts what is repeated and emotionally reinforced. It learns through exposure. So whatever you consistently think, feel, and imagine, it begins to treat as reality. Even if it limits you. Even if it is not true. This is why breaking a pattern is not about willpower alone. It is about changing what your mind has been trained to expect. And that begins with awareness. Right now, you are stepping into a new relationship with your mind. Instead of being controlled by it, you are observing it. Instead of reacting instantly, you are pausing. Instead of believing every thought, you are questioning it. And slowly, gently, you begin to feel something unfamiliar. Space. A space between thought and reaction. A space between emotion and action. This space is where control lives. Not forced control. Not rigid discipline. But a calm, steady presence that allows you to choose. And in that space, a new possibility begins to form. What if you are not limited by your past patterns? What if the thoughts you repeat are not fixed, but flexible? What if the system running your life can be rewritten? You do not need to answer these questions yet. Just feel them. Let them sit quietly in your mind, like seeds waiting for the right moment. Because something deeper is happening now. You are no longer fully identified with your patterns. You are beginning to see them, from the outside. And once you see them clearly, they can no longer control you in the same way. This is the first shift. Not dramatic. Not loud. But powerful. A quiet awakening. You are realizing that your mind has been running on scripts. And that those scripts can be observed. And anything that can be observed can eventually be changed. But change does not happen instantly. It begins with understanding. With patience. With awareness that deepens over time. So for now, you simply watch. You notice your thoughts without attaching to them. You feel your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. You observe your reactions without immediately following them. And in doing so, you begin to reclaim something you didn't know you had lost. Control. Not over everything. But over the one place that matters most. Your inner world. And as you sit with this awareness, something within you becomes still. Not empty, but clear. Not silent, but peaceful. As if beneath all the noise, there has always been a steady presence, waiting for you to notice it. And now that you have, it will not disappear again. Your thoughts move before you decide them. Your emotions rise before you understand them. You start to feel the unsettling truth that much of your life has been lived automatically. But awareness begins to slow the machine, and you feel the first flicker of control. There is a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when a thought appears in your mind, and you didn't choose it. It simply arrives. Fully formed. Carrying a feeling. Guiding your next reaction before you even realize what is happening. And if you watch closely, you begin to see something unsettling. You are not thinking your thoughts as much as you are receiving them. They come, one after another, like a current that never stops. And most of the time, you follow. Without questioning. Without pausing. Without even noticing that you had a choice. This is how the mind has been operating. Not as a tool you consciously use. But as a system that runs on its own. And you have been living inside it. Think about how often you have said something and immediately wished you hadn't. How often you felt fear before you understood why. How often you delayed something important, not because you decided to, but because something inside you resisted. It feels like you. But if it were truly you, would it act without your permission? Would it move faster than your awareness? There is a subtle discomfort in realizing this. A quiet tension that begins to rise as you see the truth more clearly. Because it challenges something deep. The idea that you are always in control. You begin to notice how quickly your mood can shift. How one small thought can pull you into doubt. How a memory, a word, a glance, can trigger a reaction before logic has time to respond. It happens instantly. And in that instant, the mind has already decided the direction. This is the automatic nature of your subconscious. It does not wait. It does not analyze. It simply executes what it has learned. Like a machine following instructions written long ago, it runs patterns that feel familiar, even when they no longer serve you. This is why you sometimes feel trapped in cycles. Not because you lack strength, but because the system you are operating from was built through repetition, not intention. Every experience you had, especially the emotional ones, left an imprint. Every repeated thought became a pathway. Every belief you accepted became a command. And over time, these commands turned into automatic responses. So when you face something uncertain, your mind doesn't ask, what is possible? It asks, what have we done before? And then it repeats it. Even if it leads to the same frustration. Even if it limits your growth. Because the subconscious values familiarity more than progress. Familiar feels safe. Even when it keeps you small. You begin to see it now. How your thoughts are not always new, but recycled. How your reactions are not always chosen, but triggered. How your emotions are not always accurate, but conditioned. And for a moment, this realization can feel heavy. Because it means that much of what you believed was you has been running automatically. But stay with this feeling. Do not push it away. Because within this discomfort, there is clarity. And within that clarity, there is power. You are beginning to see the machine. And the moment you see it, you are no longer completely inside it. This is where something shifts. Very subtly. You notice a thought, but instead of immediately believing it, you pause. Just for a second. And in that second, something new appears. Awareness. It does not stop the thought. It does not fight it. It simply observes. And that observation changes everything. Because now, there are two layers inside you. The thought, and the one noticing the thought. The emotion, and the one feeling the emotion without being consumed by it. The reaction, and the space before the reaction. This space is small at first. Almost fragile. But it is real. And as you begin to notice it more often, it starts to grow. You realize that you are not the constant stream of thoughts. You are the awareness behind them. You are not the automatic reactions. You are the presence that can choose whether to follow them. This is the beginning of control. Not forced control. Not suppression. But conscious awareness. The kind that slows everything down just enough for you to see what is happening before it fully takes over. Imagine your mind as a fast-moving river. For years, you have been inside the current, carried by it, moved by it, unable to stop its direction. But now, you are stepping slightly out of it. Not completely. But enough to see the flow. Enough to realize that the river is moving, but you do not have to be lost in it. This is where reprogramming begins. Not by trying to control every thought. That would only create resistance. But by changing your relationship with them. Instead of reacting instantly, you observe. Instead of believing automatically, you question. Instead of following every emotional impulse, you allow it to pass without attachment. And slowly, something remarkable happens. The patterns begin to lose their speed. Not because they disappear. But because you are no longer feeding them unconsciously. Your awareness interrupts the loop. Thought, pause, awareness. Emotion, pause, awareness. Reaction, pause, awareness. And in that pause, you gain choice. This is where you begin to introduce something new. A different kind of thought. A deliberate one. At first, it feels unfamiliar. Maybe even unnatural. Because your mind is used to running what it already knows. But now, you gently guide it. Not with force, but with repetition. You begin to plant small, intentional ideas. I can respond differently. I am not controlled by every thought. I am aware. These are not just words. They are new instructions. And when repeated with calm focus, they begin to reach the deeper layers of your mind. The same way old patterns were formed. New ones can be created. Through repetition. Through feeling. Through awareness. You do not need to change everything at once. You only need to create small moments of consciousness. Moments where you see the pattern, and choose differently. Moments where you feel the emotion, but do not let it define your action. Moments where you pause, and remember that you are not the machine. You are the one who can observe it. And with each moment like this, the balance begins to shift. The automatic mind slows. The aware mind strengthens. And gradually, almost quietly, you begin to feel something you haven't felt before. A sense of control that is not forced, but natural. Not rigid, but calm. As if you are no longer being pushed by every thought. But instead, gently guiding the direction of your inner world. This is the flicker. Small, but powerful. The first sign that the system is no longer running completely without you. You are present now. You are aware. And that awareness is changing everything. You may still feel the old patterns trying to pull you back. You may still notice the automatic reactions rising. But something is different. You see them. And because you see them, they no longer have the same control. This is how transformation begins. Not with a dramatic shift, but with a quiet awareness that grows stronger over time. And as you continue to observe, to pause, to choose, you begin to sense that the mind you once followed blindly is something you can now understand, and perhaps something you can reshape. Deep beneath your conscious mind lies a script, ancient, persistent, unquestioned. It shapes what you expect, what you allow, what you become. You begin to sense it, not clearly, but enough to feel its weight. And with that awareness, the blueprint starts to reveal its cracks. There is something deeper than your thoughts. Something quieter than your emotions. Something that has been guiding both, long before you ever noticed it. You don't see it directly. You don't hear it clearly. But you feel its influence in every decision you make. In every expectation you carry. In every limit you unconsciously accept. It is your internal blueprint. A silent design that has been shaping your reality from beneath the surface. And the most surprising part is, you did not consciously create it. It was built over time. Layer by layer. Experience by experience. Emotion by emotion. Like an architect working in the dark, your subconscious mind constructed a model of how life works, and who you are within it. And once that model was formed, it began to guide everything. You expect certain outcomes without realizing why. You allow certain behaviors, from yourself and others, without questioning them. You move toward what feels familiar, even if it limits you. Because the blueprint says, this is how it is. And anything that challenges it, feels uncomfortable. This is where the struggle begins. You want something more. Something different. You imagine a version of yourself that is confident, clear, in control. But when you try to move toward it, something inside resists. A quiet hesitation. A subtle doubt. A feeling that pulls you back. And it doesn't make sense. Because consciously, you want to change. But subconsciously, you are being guided by something older. Something already decided. This is why effort alone often feels exhausting. You push forward, but something pulls back. You try to think positively, but doubt returns. You attempt new actions, but old habits quietly reappear. It feels like conflict. Because it is. A conflict between your conscious desire and your subconscious blueprint. And until now, the blueprint has always been stronger. Not because it is more powerful by nature, but because it is more practiced, more familiar, more deeply embedded. It has been running for years, repeating the same instructions, reinforcing the same beliefs. I am this kind of person. This is what I can do. This is what I deserve. And each time these ideas were felt, repeated, or experienced, they were written deeper into the system. Until they became invisible. Not because they disappeared, but because they became normal. And what feels normal rarely gets questioned. But now, something is changing. You are beginning to sense the blueprint. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to feel that something beneath your thoughts is shaping them. You start to notice patterns that go beyond single moments. Why certain situations always seem to unfold in similar ways. Why the same emotions return in different circumstances. Why certain limits feel real, even when there is no clear reason for them. It is not coincidence. It is design. A design you have been living inside. And as you become aware of it, something remarkable begins to happen. The blueprint starts to show its edges. Like a structure hidden in fog, it slowly becomes visible. You see how your expectations influence your perception. How your beliefs filter what you notice. How your inner assumptions shape your outer experience. And for the first time, you realize your reality is not just happening to you. It is being interpreted, and partially created, through this internal design. This realization is powerful. But it can also feel heavy. Because it means that what you have been experiencing is not entirely external. Part of it has been coming from within. But stay with this understanding. Do not turn away from it. Because within this awareness lies the key to change. If the blueprint was built, it can be rebuilt. If it was programmed, it can be reprogrammed. But first, it must be seen. And you are beginning to see it now. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But enough to recognize that the limits you feel are not fixed truths. They are learned patterns. And anything learned can be changed. This is where the shift begins. Instead of identifying with every thought, you start asking, where did this come from? Instead of accepting every limitation, you begin to wonder, is this actually true, or just familiar? These questions are not meant to create doubt. They are meant to create space. Space between you and the blueprint. Because in that space, you are no longer fully controlled by it. You begin to see it as something separate. Something that exists within you, but is not you. And this distinction changes everything. Imagine holding a map that you have followed your entire life. You trusted it completely. You never questioned its directions. But now, you notice that some of the paths lead in circles. Some of the destinations are limiting. Some of the routes no longer serve you. The map is not wrong. It is just outdated. And you are no longer required to follow it blindly. This is how you begin to reprogram your mind. Not by rejecting everything at once, but by gently updating the blueprint. You introduce new possibilities. Quietly. Consistently. You begin to imagine different outcomes. You allow yourself to consider new identities. You explore thoughts that once felt unfamiliar. At first, they may feel uncertain. Because they do not match the existing design. But that is exactly why they matter. Each new thought is like a small adjustment to the blueprint. Each new belief is a line being redrawn. And over time, these small changes begin to reshape the entire structure. You do not need to force it. You only need to be consistent. Your subconscious mind responds to repetition and feeling. So when you calmly return to a new idea, again and again, it begins to register it. It begins to accept it. And slowly, it begins to reflect it. This is the transformation that is starting within you. Subtle. Gradual. But real. You begin to feel less confined by old expectations. Less defined by past patterns. Less limited by automatic beliefs. And in their place, something new begins to emerge. A sense of possibility. Not loud or overwhelming, but steady. As if your mind is opening in a way it never has before. You are no longer just reacting to the world. You are beginning to shape how you experience it. And with that, your identity starts to shift. Not suddenly, but quietly. You are no longer the person who follows the blueprint without question. You are the one who sees it, understands it, and begins to redesign it. This is where real control begins. Not control over everything outside, but control over the system within. And as you continue to observe, to question, to gently introduce new patterns, the blueprint that once felt fixed starts to change. Not all at once, but enough for you to feel it. A slight difference in how you think. A subtle shift in how you respond. A growing sense that something inside you is becoming more aligned, more intentional, more aware. And as this awareness deepens, you begin to realize something even more profound. The blueprint was never your true identity. It was only a structure you learned to live inside. A powerful separation begins. You are not your thoughts, not your fears, not your past reactions. There is a space between you and the patterns that once controlled you. And in that space, something extraordinary begins to form choice. There is a quiet moment, so subtle you could almost miss it, when you notice a thought, and instead of becoming it, you simply watch it. It passes through your mind, carrying its usual weight, its familiar tone. But this time, something is different. You are not inside it. You are beside it. And in that small shift, a deeper truth begins to unfold. You are not your thoughts. Not the ones that doubt you. Not the ones that limit you. Not even the ones that try to define you. They appear. They move. They fade. But you remain. For so long, the line between you and your thoughts was invisible. Whatever you thought, you believed. Whatever you felt, you became. Whatever reaction arose, you followed. There was no separation. Just a continuous stream of experience that felt like identity. But now, something is changing. You are beginning to see the stream, without being carried by it. And with that awareness comes a quiet realization. If you can observe a thought, then it cannot be you. If you can feel an emotion, then it is something you are experiencing, not something you are. This may feel simple at first. But the deeper you sit with it, the more profound it becomes. Because it challenges the very idea of who you thought you were. Think about the fears you have carried. The ones that appear in certain situations. The ones that whisper hesitation. The ones that convince you to stay within familiar limits. For years, they felt like a part of you. But now, as you observe them, you begin to notice something unexpected. They follow patterns. They arrive at predictable moments. They speak in familiar ways. They repeat the same messages, again and again. And anything that repeats like that is not identity. It is programming. This is where the separation deepens. You begin to see your fears not as truths, but as responses. Your doubts not as reality, but as echoes of past conditioning. Your reactions not as decisions, but as patterns unfolding. And suddenly, the weight they carried begins to shift. Because something inside you is no longer fully convinced. You are watching. And in watching, you are creating space. This space is not loud. It does not demand attention. But it is powerful. It is the gap between stimulus and response. The pause between thought and belief. The moment where automatic behavior can be interrupted. This is where choice is born. Not forced choice. Not the kind that requires struggle. But a natural, quiet ability to decide. You begin to feel it in small moments. A thought arises, telling you to doubt yourself. But you don't immediately follow it. An emotion surfaces, pulling you toward reaction. But you allow it to pass without acting on it. A familiar pattern starts to repeat. But something within you pauses. And in that pause, you realize that you are no longer fully controlled. This is not about eliminating thoughts or emotions. They will continue to come. But now, they no longer define you. They no longer have absolute authority. Because there is something deeper within you. Something that observes without reacting. Something that remains steady while everything else moves. Something that has always been there, quietly aware. This is your true center. Not the conditioned self. Not the learned identity. But the awareness behind it all. And as you begin to rest in this awareness, something inside you starts to settle. The urgency of your thoughts begins to fade. The intensity of your reactions softens. The need to immediately respond starts to dissolve. Because you are no longer caught in the automatic flow. You are present. And presence changes everything. It slows the system down. It allows you to see what is happening before it fully unfolds. And in that clarity, you begin to recognize something important. You have been living through patterns. But you are not those patterns. You have been experiencing fear. But you are not fear. You have been reacting automatically. But you are not the reaction. This distinction is the foundation of transformation. Because once you know this, you no longer need to fight your mind. You no longer need to suppress your thoughts. You only need to observe and choose. This is where reprogramming becomes possible. Not through force, but through awareness and direction. When a thought arises, you see it clearly. And instead of following it, you gently introduce a different perspective. Not aggressively. Not with resistance. But with calm intention. You begin to remind yourself. This is just a thought. This is just a pattern. I can choose differently. At first, it may feel unfamiliar. Because the old patterns are still strong. But each time you pause, each time you observe, each time you choose, you weaken the automatic response. And you strengthen your awareness. It is not about perfection. It is about consistency. Small moments of choice, repeated over time, begin to reshape the system. The subconscious mind starts to receive new instructions. Not through forceful effort, but through calm repetition and clear awareness. And slowly, something begins to shift. You notice that your reactions are not as immediate. Your thoughts are not as convincing. Your emotions are not as overwhelming. There is space now. And in that space, you feel something new. Freedom. Not complete, not absolute. But real. A growing sense that you are no longer trapped inside your own mind. That you are no longer defined by what arises within you. That you have the ability to stand back, observe, and choose. This is the beginning of true control. Not control over every thought, but control over your response to them. And as this awareness deepens, your identity begins to shift. You are no longer the person who reacts automatically. You are the one who observes first. You are no longer the one who believes every thought. You are the one who questions and chooses. You are no longer defined by your past patterns. You are becoming something new. something aware, something intentional, something steady. And this transformation does not need to be forced. It unfolds naturally. As long as you remain present. As long as you continue to observe. As long as you remember that you are not what appears in your mind, but the one who is aware of it. And the more you rest in this awareness, the stronger it becomes. The more natural it feels. Until one day, the separation that once felt subtle becomes clear, stable, unshakable. You are here. And your thoughts are there. You are steady. And your emotions are moving. You are aware. And your patterns are simply unfolding. And in that realization, choice is no longer something you try to create. It is something that naturally exists within you. Two versions of you now exist at once. One familiar, comfortable, limited. The other quiet, emerging, powerful. You feel the tension between them and realize transformation is not peaceful, it is a shift in identity. There comes a point in your awareness where something no longer feels simple. Not because you are confused, but because you are seeing too clearly. You begin to notice that there are two movements inside you. One is familiar. Fast. Predictable. It reacts quickly, speaks in known patterns, pulls you toward what you have always done. The other is different. Quiet. Steady. Almost patient. It does not rush. It observes. It waits. And for the first time, you feel both, at the same time. This is where the tension begins. Before, you were fully inside the familiar version of yourself. There was no conflict, because there was no separation. Your thoughts were your identity. Your reactions were your truth. But now, you see the patterns. You feel the space. You recognize the possibility of choice. And because of that, the old identity no longer flows without resistance. You begin to notice moments where the familiar reaction rises. But something inside you pauses. It questions. It hesitates. It offers a different direction. And in that moment, you feel it. The split. Two versions of you, existing at once. One pulling you back into what is known. The other gently guiding you towards something new. This is not comfortable. It can feel like confusion. Like inconsistency. Like you are no longer stable in who you are. But this is not a loss of identity. It is the beginning of transformation. Because growth does not happen in certainty. It happens in tension. The old identity does not disappear immediately. It resists. Not because it is wrong, but because it has been reinforced for so long. It knows how to survive. It knows how to keep things predictable. And the subconscious mind values that. Familiar patterns feel safe. Even when they limit you. So when you begin to change. When you start to observe instead of react. When you introduce new thoughts. When you pause where you once rushed. The old identity responds. It sends signals. Doubt. Discomfort. A subtle urge to return to what feels known. You may notice thoughts like, "This isn't me. This feels strange. Why am I acting differently?" And for a moment, you might believe them. Because they carry the weight of familiarity. But look deeper. These thoughts are not truth. They are echoes of the old program trying to maintain control. They are patterns defending their existence. And this is where awareness becomes essential. Because without it, you may mistake this resistance for failure. You may think something is wrong. But nothing is wrong. You are simply witnessing the transition between two identities. The old one, built from repetition, conditioning, and unconscious patterns. And the new one, forming through awareness, intention, and conscious choice. This new identity is not loud. It does not demand attention. It emerges quietly. Through small moments. A different response. A calmer reaction. A thought that feels more aligned with who you want to become. At first, these moments are subtle. Easy to overlook. But they matter. Because each one is a signal that something inside you is changing. The key is not to force the new identity. Not to reject the old one aggressively. But to understand the process. The old patterns will continue to appear for a time. They will repeat themselves. But now, you see them. And that changes everything. Instead of being pulled completely into them, you observe. You feel the urge, but you do not immediately follow it. You notice the thought, but you do not fully believe it. You experience the reaction, but you pause before acting on it. This pause is where the shift happens. Because in that space, the new identity has room to emerge. You begin to ask yourself different questions. Is this the response I want to repeat? Does this align with who I am becoming? And slowly, gently, you start choosing differently. Not every time, but more often than before. And that is enough. Because transformation is not built in one moment. It is built through repetition. The same way the old identity was formed. The new one must be reinforced. Through consistent awareness. Through intentional choice. Through calm persistence. You begin to introduce new patterns. Not by force. But by returning to them, again and again. A thought of confidence. A moment of patience. A decision to act differently. Each time you choose the new path, you strengthen it. Each time you observe the old pattern without following it, you weaken it. And gradually, the balance begins to shift. The new identity becomes more familiar. The old one becomes less dominant. But during this transition, the tension remains. You may feel pulled in both directions. Some days, the old patterns feel stronger. Other days, the new awareness feels clearer. This is natural. It is part of the process. Because you are not just changing behavior. You are changing identity. And identity does not shift instantly. It evolves. Through repetition. Through awareness. Through time. So instead of resisting the tension, allow it. Observe it. See it for what it is, a sign that something is moving within you. A sign that the old structure is loosening. A sign that the new one is forming. You are no longer fixed. You are becoming. And this becoming requires patience. It requires trust. Not in the outcome, but in the process itself. Because even when it feels uncertain, even when it feels uncomfortable, something deeper is stabilizing within you. Your awareness is growing stronger. Your ability to pause is becoming more natural. Your sense of choice is expanding. And with that, your identity is shifting. You are no longer just the person shaped by past patterns. You are the one who sees them, questions them, and begins to move beyond them. This is where true change takes root. Not in sudden decisions, but in repeated awareness. Not in forced effort, but in calm consistency. And as you continue to observe, to pause, to choose, the new identity begins to feel less distant, less unfamiliar, more real. Until one day, the tension that once felt strong becomes quieter. And the version of you that once felt new begins to feel natural. You begin to understand that change does not happen through effort, but through repetition and silence. Beneath your thoughts lies something programmable. Something listening, always. And for the first time, you start speaking directly to it. There is a quiet realization forming within you now. Change is not created in moments of intensity. It is not built through force. It is not sustained through struggle. Real change happens in silence. In the spaces where no one is watching. In the moments where your mind is calm, open, and receptive. Because beneath everything you have been observing, beneath your thoughts, your reactions, your awareness, there is something deeper. Something that does not argue. Something that does not question. Something that simply listens. Your subconscious mind. It has been listening your entire life. Not just to what you say out loud, but to what you repeat internally. To what you feel consistently. To what you imagine vividly. It does not filter truth from assumption. It does not separate reality from repetition. It accepts what is impressed upon it. And then it expresses it through your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors. This is why effort alone has never been enough. You can consciously try to think differently. You can push yourself to act in new ways. But if the deeper layer has not changed, the old patterns return. Quietly. Automatically. Because the system beneath your awareness is still running the same instructions. And now, you are beginning to understand something powerful. If that system has been programmed, it can be reprogrammed. Not through force, but through repetition. Not through struggle, but through calm, consistent direction. This is where your approach begins to shift. Instead of trying to control every thought during the day, you start to focus on the moments when your mind is most open. When resistance is low. When awareness is present. When the subconscious is more receptive to suggestion. These moments are subtle. But they exist. And when you begin to notice them, you realize that your mind is not always in the same state. There are times when it is active and analytical. And there are times when it is quiet. Almost like a door has opened beneath the surface. In those moments, what you introduce into your mind carries more weight. More influence. More power. This is where reprogramming truly begins. Not by fighting the old patterns, but by gently replacing them. You begin to speak differently within yourself. Not loudly. Not forcefully. But clearly. Intentionally. You introduce thoughts that align with who you are becoming. I am steady. I respond with awareness. I am not controlled by old patterns. At first, these words may feel unfamiliar. Because they do not match the old programming. But that is exactly why they matter. The subconscious does not require immediate belief. It requires repetition. And feeling. So you begin to pair your words with calm presence. You do not rush them. You do not question them. You allow them to settle. To sink beneath the surface. Like seeds placed into quiet soil. You understand now that the mind does not change through pressure. It changes through consistency. Through gentle reinforcement. The same way old beliefs were formed. New ones can be created. Every time you repeat a thought with awareness. Every time you feel it as if it is real. Every time you return to it without resistance. You are writing new code. Not on the surface, but deep within the system. And slowly, something begins to shift. The old patterns still appear. But they feel weaker. Less convincing. Because there is something new being introduced. Something that does not react automatically. Something that carries a different energy. A different direction. You begin to notice that your internal dialogue is changing. Not completely. But enough to feel the difference. There is less noise. Less urgency. More clarity. More intention. And with that, your responses begin to change. Not because you are forcing them, but because the underlying instructions are evolving. This is the power of subconscious reprogramming. It does not demand immediate results. It works quietly, gradually, but deeply. And as it works, your identity begins to shift from within. You no longer feel like you are trying to become someone new. You begin to feel like you already are. And you are simply allowing that version of you to emerge. This is where transformation becomes natural. Not something you chase, but something you align with. And now, you begin to integrate this understanding into your daily experience. You create small moments of stillness. Moments where you pause. Where you become aware. Where you intentionally guide your thoughts. It does not need to be long. It only needs to be consistent. Because consistency is what the subconscious responds to, not intensity. So you begin to return to these moments again and again. A quiet repetition. A steady rhythm. And with each repetition, the new patterns grow stronger. The old ones lose their hold. And your mind begins to reflect what you are consistently feeding it. This is where control deepens. Not as effort, but as alignment. You are no longer trying to fight your mind. You are working with it. Understanding its nature. Respecting its process. And guiding it with intention. And as you continue, you begin to sense something even more profound. That there is a specific moment. A time when your mind becomes even more open. Even more receptive. A moment where the boundary between conscious and subconscious begins to soften. And what you place into your mind during that time carries even greater influence. You may not have fully noticed it before, but it has always been there. A quiet window. Waiting. And as your awareness deepens, you begin to feel it approaching. Just before sleep, your mind opens in a different way. Defenses soften. Logic fades. Suggestion becomes reality. You realize this moment is not ordinary, it is a doorway. And what you place into your mind here begins to shape your life. There is a moment each night. So quiet, so ordinary, that most people pass through it without ever noticing its power. It comes when the day begins to fade. When your body starts to soften. When your thoughts lose their sharp edges and begin to drift. You have felt it many times. That gentle transition between wakefulness and sleep. Where you are not fully here, but not fully gone. A space in between. And in that space, something remarkable happens. Your mind opens. Not in the way it does during the day, focused, analytical, guarded. But in a deeper way. A receptive way. A way that allows impressions to move beyond the surface and settle into the core. This moment has always been there. But until now, you did not see it for what it truly is. A doorway. A threshold between the conscious and the subconscious. And as you begin to understand this, you realize something that changes everything. What enters your mind in this moment does not stay on the surface. It goes deeper. Much deeper. But here is the challenge. For most of your life, this moment has not been used intentionally. You have entered it carrying the residue of your day. Unfinished thoughts. Lingering worries. Repeated doubts. And without realizing it, you have been feeding these patterns into your subconscious, night after night. Think about it. The last thoughts you have before sleep. How often are they calm? How often are they intentional? Or are they filled with overthinking, replaying situations, imagining problems that have not even happened yet? This is where the cycle continues. Because what you impress upon your mind in this state is not filtered. It is accepted. And once accepted, it begins to shape your inner world. This is why certain patterns feel so persistent. Not because they are unchangeable, but because they have been reinforced repeatedly, in the most receptive state of your mind. Night after night. Without awareness. Without intention. But now, something has shifted. You are aware of this moment. And awareness changes everything. Because now, you are no longer entering this state unconsciously. You are approaching it with intention. You begin to see it as an opportunity. A small window of time. But one with immense influence. And you realize that you do not need hours. You do not need effort or struggle. You only need a few minutes of calm, focused direction. This is where reprogramming becomes precise. You allow your body to relax. You let the day fade without resistance. You do not carry every thought with you. Instead, you gently guide your attention inward. And as your mind begins to soften, you introduce something new. Not with force, but with clarity. A thought. A feeling. An image. Something that represents who you are becoming. You do not rush it. You let it unfold slowly. As if you are placing it carefully into the quiet space of your mind. Because in this state, the subconscious is listening more closely than ever. It is not analyzing. It is not questioning. It is receiving. This is why your approach matters. You do not repeat words mechanically. You allow yourself to feel them. To experience them as if they are already real. You imagine yourself responding differently. You see yourself acting with clarity, with control. You feel the calm confidence of a new identity. Not as something distant, but as something present. Something real in this moment. And as you do this, something begins to shift. Not dramatically, but subtly. You feel a sense of alignment. As if your inner world is beginning to move in a new direction. And this is where the true power lies. Because the subconscious does not respond to effort. It responds to feeling. To repetition. To what is impressed upon it consistently, especially in this state. So you return to this practice, night after night. Not as a task, but as a quiet ritual. A moment of connection with your inner self. A moment where you are no longer reacting to your day, but consciously shaping what comes next. And over time, these few minutes begin to accumulate. They begin to build. The thoughts you introduce become more familiar. The feelings become more natural. The images become clearer. And slowly, the subconscious begins to accept them. Not as imagination, but as reality. This is when transformation begins to move beyond the surface. You notice small changes during the day. Your reactions shift slightly. Your thoughts feel less automatic. Your responses carry more awareness. It is not forced. It happens naturally. Because the instructions beneath your conscious mind are changing. This is the result of consistent, intentional input. And it all begins in those few quiet minutes before sleep. You begin to understand that this moment is not just a transition into rest. It is a point of creation. A place where the seeds of your future patterns are planted. And once you see it this way, you cannot return to using it unconsciously. You become aware of what you allow into your mind. You become intentional with what you repeat. You become present with what you feel. Because you know that this moment is shaping something deeper. Something lasting. And as you continue this practice, your identity begins to shift in a way that feels natural. Not forced. Not rushed. But steady. You are no longer trying to change during the day alone. You are working with your mind at its most receptive point. Guiding it gently, consistently. And allowing it to align with who you are becoming. This is the quiet power of those 5 minutes. Simple, but profound. Subtle, but transformative. And as you lie there, allowing your mind to drift, you begin to feel something deeper than control. Trust. Trust in the process. Trust in your ability to guide your mind. Trust in the transformation that is already unfolding. And in that trust, you let go. Not into unconsciousness, but into a deeper level of awareness, where the boundary between thought and reality begins to soften. And what you place within your mind begins to take root. It is not enough to repeat words, they must feel real. You learn to impress the subconscious through emotion, imagery, certainty. The line between imagination and reality begins to blur. And your inner world starts responding as if the change has already happened. There is a subtle difference you are beginning to notice. A difference so small, yet so powerful, that it determines whether change remains an idea, or becomes a reality within you. It is not in the words you repeat. It is not in how often you say them. It is in how deeply you feel them. Because your subconscious mind does not respond to language the way your conscious mind does. It responds to experience, to emotion, to imagery, to the sense of something being real. And this is where many people unknowingly remain stuck. They repeat positive thoughts. They try to think differently. They tell themselves new beliefs. But something feels empty, disconnected. As if the words are floating on the surface, never reaching the deeper layers where real change happens. You may have felt this before. Repeating something like, "I am confident," while a quiet voice inside whispers, "No, you're not." Trying to believe something new, but feeling the weight of the old pattern pulling you back. This is not failure. It is simply a misunderstanding of how the mind accepts new information. Because the subconscious does not change through repetition alone. It changes through repetition, combined with feeling. Through repetition, combined with certainty. Through repetition, combined with a sense of reality. And now, you are beginning to understand how to create that. You are no longer just speaking to your mind. You are communicating with it in the language it understands. The language of experience. Imagine this for a moment. You are lying in that quiet state before sleep. Your body relaxed. Your mind softened. And instead of just repeating words, you begin to see. You begin to feel. You create a simple scene in your mind. Not something distant, not something complicated, but something real. You see yourself responding differently. Calm where you once reacted. Confident where you once hesitated. Clear where you once felt uncertain. And you do not just observe this scene. You step into it. You experience it from within. You feel what it would be like to be that version of yourself. The steadiness. The clarity. The quiet control. You allow that feeling to expand. Not forcing it, but gently holding it in your awareness. And as you do this, something begins to happen. The subconscious starts to accept the experience. Not as imagination, but as something real. Because to the deeper mind, there is no clear boundary between what is vividly imagined and what is physically experienced. It responds to both in the same way. This is the shift you are making. You are no longer trying to convince your mind with logic. You are allowing it to feel a new reality. And feeling is what creates belief. Not words alone. Not effort alone. But the combination of thought, emotion, and imagery, repeated consistently. This is how new patterns are formed. You begin to notice that when you truly feel a thought, it carries a different weight. It settles deeper. It lingers longer. It does not fade as quickly as surface-level thinking. And with each repetition, it becomes more familiar. More natural. Until it no longer feels like something you are trying to create, but something that already exists within you. This is how the line between imagination and reality begins to blur. Not in a confusing way, but in a transformative one. Because your inner world starts to respond as if the change has already happened. Your mind begins to adjust its expectations. Your reactions begin to shift subtly. Your behavior starts to align with the new pattern. Not because you forced it, but because it now feels real. This is the power of emotional imprinting. And once you understand it, your approach becomes more precise. You no longer repeat empty words. You create meaningful experiences within your mind. You allow yourself to feel the outcome before it appears externally. You trust the process because you understand how it works. And as you continue, your confidence begins to grow. Not as something you push, but as something that emerges naturally. Because you are no longer waiting for reality to confirm your change. You are creating the internal experience first. And that internal experience begins to shape everything else. This is where transformation becomes deeper. More stable. More real. You are no longer trying to escape old patterns. You are replacing them with something stronger. Something that feels true. And as this truth settles within you, your identity begins to shift once again. You are not the person who hopes for change. You are the person who feels it internally and allows it to unfold. This is the difference between effort and alignment. Effort pushes. Alignment attracts. And now, you are moving into alignment. With each night. With each quiet moment. With each intentional feeling. You are reinforcing the new pattern. Strengthening it. Making it more familiar than the old one. And over time, the old patterns begin to fade. Not because you fought them, but because they no longer feel real. They lose their emotional charge. Their influence weakens. And in their place, a new internal reality begins to stabilize. This is the shift you have been building toward. From awareness to understanding to intentional creation. And now, you are not just observing your mind. You are shaping it. Gently. Consistently. Powerfully. You are learning how to impress new truths upon your subconscious. Not through force, but through feeling. And as you continue this practice, you begin to notice something remarkable. The version of you that once felt imagined starts to feel familiar. Natural. Real. As if it has always been there, waiting beneath the surface. For you to recognize it. And now that you have, it begins to emerge more clearly. More consistently. More effortlessly. Because what feels real inside eventually expresses itself outside. Something shifts quietly. Your reactions change before you notice them. Old fears lose their grip, not through force, but through irrelevance. You are no longer trying to change, you are becoming someone new. There is a moment in your transformation that does not announce itself. No sudden realization. No dramatic shift. Just a quiet difference. So subtle that at first, you almost overlook it. A situation appears, one that would normally trigger a familiar reaction. But this time, something is different. You pause. Not because you force yourself to, but because the reaction does not rise with the same intensity. It is there, faint, almost distant. And without effort, you respond differently. Calmly. Clearly. As if the version of you that once struggled is no longer fully present. This is the shift. Not loud. Not obvious. But real. You begin to notice it in small moments. A thought that once pulled you into doubt, now passes more quickly. An emotion that once overwhelmed you, now feels lighter. A habit that once repeated automatically, now feels optional. And you don't fully understand when it changed. Because it didn't happen in a single moment. It happened gradually. Quietly. Through repetition. Through awareness. Through the consistent impressions you have been placing into your mind. This is what true transformation feels like. Not like forcing yourself to become someone new, but like naturally growing into a different version of yourself. The old identity does not disappear suddenly. It fades. Not because you pushed it away, but because it is no longer reinforced. It is no longer repeated. It is no longer felt as real. And without repetition, it loses its strength. This is why your fears are beginning to feel different. They may still appear, but they no longer carry the same weight. They no longer feel like truth. They feel like echoes. Faint reminders of patterns that once defined you. But now, you see them for what they are. And because of that, they no longer control you. This is not suppression. This is evolution. The mind does not need to fight what it has outgrown. It simply moves beyond it. And this is exactly what is happening within you. You are not forcing yourself to change. You are becoming. And becoming feels different. It feels natural. Effortless in a way that is difficult to explain. Because the change is happening at the level of identity. Not just behavior. You are no longer trying to act differently. You are starting to feel like someone who naturally does. And this changes everything. Because behavior follows identity. Not the other way around. When you see yourself differently. When you feel differently about who you are. Your actions begin to align automatically. This is why the process you have been practicing is so powerful. You have not just been changing your thoughts. You have been reshaping the way your mind perceives you. Through repetition. Through feeling. Through consistent inner direction. You have been introducing a new version of yourself. And allowing it to become familiar. And now, it is beginning to take form. Not as an idea, but as reality within you. You begin to trust your responses more. You feel less need to question yourself. You notice a sense of steadiness that was not there before. Not perfect, but present. And growing. This is the result of internal alignment. Your subconscious is no longer working against your conscious desires. It is beginning to support them. Because the instructions you have been giving it are now being accepted. And once accepted, they begin to express themselves naturally. This is why your reactions are changing before you even notice them. Because the system beneath your awareness has already started to shift. It is no longer running the same patterns with the same intensity. It is adapting. Evolving. Responding to the new impressions you have been consistently providing. This is the power of working with your mind, instead of against it. And as you continue, this change becomes more stable. More consistent. More real. You begin to recognize yourself in a new way. Not as someone trying to improve, but as someone who is already changing. Already evolving. Already becoming. And with that recognition, your confidence deepens. Not as something you need to prove, but as something you quietly feel. A knowing. A sense that you are no longer where you once were. That something within you has shifted. And it is not going back. This is where identity transformation becomes undeniable. Not because of external results, but because of internal certainty. You feel it. In your thoughts. In your reactions. In your presence. And this feeling continues to grow. As long as you remain consistent. As long as you continue to reinforce the new patterns. As long as you return to the quiet moments. And guide your mind with intention. This is how you stabilize the change. Not by doing more, but by continuing what you have already begun. You maintain the awareness. You continue the repetition. You allow the feelings to deepen. And over time, the new identity becomes dominant. The old one fades into the background. Not erased, but no longer in control. And you begin to move through your life with a different sense of self. More present. More aware. More aligned. You are no longer reacting to life in the same way. You are engaging with it from a new level of understanding. And this understanding brings something deeper than change. It brings stability. A grounded sense of who you are becoming. And as this stability grows, you begin to realize something important. That this process is not temporary. It is not something you do for a short period of time. It is a way of relating to your mind. A way of guiding your inner world. And once you learn it, it stays with you. Because it is not based on effort. It is based on awareness. And awareness, once developed, does not disappear. It deepens. It strengthens. It becomes a natural part of how you experience yourself. And this is where transformation becomes lasting. Not something you achieve, but something you live. Transformation deepens into stability. You begin to observe your thoughts with calm authority. No longer pulled by every emotion, no longer defined by every doubt. Control is no longer effort, it becomes your natural state. There is a stage in your transformation where something settles. Not in a dramatic way. Not with intensity or force. But like a quiet surface after movement has passed. You begin to notice that your mind is no longer as loud as it once was. Thoughts still come. Emotions still rise. But they no longer pull you in the same way. There is space now. A steady distance between what you experience and how you respond. And within that distance, there is control. Not the kind of control that requires effort. Not the kind that feels rigid or forced. But a calm authority. A natural ability to observe without being consumed. To feel without being overwhelmed. To choose without hesitation. This is where your transformation begins to stabilize. Before, awareness felt like something you practiced. You had to remind yourself to pause. To observe. To choose differently. It required intention. But now, it begins to happen on its own. You notice your thoughts as they arise, without needing to chase them. You feel your emotions, without immediately reacting. You recognize patterns, without being drawn into them. And this recognition is effortless. Because it has become familiar. This is what discipline truly becomes at a deeper level. Not something you force yourself to do. But something that naturally expresses itself through your awareness. You are no longer trying to control your mind. You are understanding it. And through that understanding, control emerges. Think about how different this feels from before. There was a time when your thoughts felt overwhelming. When your emotions dictated your actions. When your patterns repeated without interruption. You may have tried to fight them. To push them away. To suppress them. But that only created more tension. Because force does not change the mind. It only resists it. But now, you are no longer resisting. You are observing. And observation changes everything. Because when you observe something clearly, it loses its unconscious power. It can no longer control you in the same way. This is the shift you are living now. You are no longer pulled by every thought. You see it, and you let it pass. You are no longer defined by every emotion. You feel it, and you allow it to move through you. You are no longer trapped in automatic reactions. You pause, and you choose. This is control. Quiet. Steady. Natural. And as this control deepens, your sense of self begins to stabilize. You are no longer constantly shifting based on what you feel in the moment. You remain centered. Grounded in awareness. Connected to something deeper than temporary thoughts or emotions. This is where identity becomes anchored. Not in external outcomes, but in internal stability. You begin to trust yourself in a different way. Not because everything is perfect, but because you know you can observe, pause, and respond with clarity. And this trust creates a sense of calm. A quiet confidence that does not need to prove itself. It simply exists. This is the result of consistent inner work. Not visible from the outside, but deeply felt within. And as you continue in this state, you begin to notice something even more subtle. Your mind starts to cooperate with you. The thoughts that once felt intrusive begin to soften. The emotions that once felt overwhelming become easier to navigate. The patterns that once felt automatic lose their momentum. Because the system has changed. Not through force, but through alignment. Your subconscious has been receiving new instructions. Through your awareness. Through your repetition. Through your emotional imprinting. And now, it is reflecting those changes back to you. This is why control feels natural now. Because it is no longer coming from the surface. It is coming from within the system itself. And this is where mastery begins to take shape. Not as something you achieve, but as something you embody. You are no longer trying to become disciplined. You are living from a place of discipline. You are no longer trying to stay aware. Awareness has become your default. You are no longer trying to manage your thoughts. You understand them and allow them to pass. This is the difference between effort and mastery. Effort requires constant attention. Mastery becomes natural. And you are moving into that space now. Slowly. Steadily. Without force. Without pressure. Just through consistent awareness and alignment. And as you remain in this state, you begin to integrate this control into your daily life. Not as something separate, but as part of how you move, think, and respond. You wake up with more clarity. You move through your day with more presence. You respond to challenges with more calm. Because your inner world is no longer chaotic. It is ordered. Not rigid, but stable. And this stability allows you to navigate life differently. With intention. With awareness. With control. And now, you begin to refine this even further. You return to the practices that brought you here. The quiet moments before sleep. The intentional thoughts. The emotional alignment. But now, you approach them from a different place. Not from a desire to change, but from a desire to maintain and deepen what you have already created. This is how transformation becomes lasting. Not through intensity, but through consistency. You continue to guide your mind gently. You continue to observe without attachment. You continue to reinforce the identity you are becoming. And in doing so, you stabilize the change. You make it permanent. And as this stability deepens, you begin to feel something even more profound. A sense of ease. Not because life has become perfect, but because your relationship with your mind has changed. You are no longer at the mercy of your thoughts. You are no longer defined by your emotions. You are no longer controlled by your patterns. You are aware. You are present. You are in control. And this control is not something you need to hold tightly. It is something that exists naturally within you. Like a quiet center. Always there. Always steady. No matter what moves around it. Your inner world now leads your outer reality. You respond, instead of react. You choose, instead of repeat. Life begins to reflect the order you have created within. There is a point in your inner evolution where something quietly reverses. For so long, you believed life was shaping your inner state. Events happened, and you reacted. People spoke, and you responded. Circumstances shifted, and your emotions followed. It felt as if the outer world was in control. But now, something has changed. You begin to notice that your inner state is no longer just reacting to life. It is influencing it. Subtly at first. Almost unnoticeable. A moment of calm where you would usually feel stress. A pause where you would normally react quickly. A different interpretation of something familiar. And slowly, you realize the direction has shifted. It is no longer only outside inside. It is also inside outside. Your inner world is beginning to lead. This is the beginning of alignment. Not the kind that is forced or imagined, but the kind that naturally emerges when your thoughts, emotions, and subconscious patterns begin to move in the same direction. You are no longer fragmented. No longer pulled in multiple directions internally. There is coherence now. A quiet structure forming within you. And because of that, your outer experience begins to respond differently. You respond instead of react. Not because you are trying to be different, but because the automatic response has weakened. You pause before emotion takes over. You observe before judgment forms. You choose before impulse decides. And in that space, your life begins to feel different. Not because the world has changed overnight, but because you are no longer interpreting it from the same internal state. This is where most people misunderstand transformation. They wait for external change first. But real change begins internally. Because the mind is not just a receiver of reality. It is a filter. A system that interprets everything through the lens of its programming. And when that programming shifts, reality feels different. Not because the world has become new, but because you are seeing it through a new internal structure. You begin to notice this in subtle ways. Situations that once triggered stress no longer carry the same emotional weight. People who once affected your mood no longer have the same influence. Challenges that once felt overwhelming now feel manageable. Not because they disappeared, but because you are no longer meeting them with the same internal reaction. This is the reflection of inner order. The subconscious patterns you have been rewriting. The awareness you have been cultivating. The identity you have been forming. All of it begins to express itself outwardly. Because the outer world is not separate from your inner world. It responds to it. Like a mirror reflecting what is consistently held within. And now, the reflection is changing. Not instantly, but steadily. You begin to feel more in control of your responses. Not controlling life itself, but controlling your participation in it. And that difference is everything. You are no longer pulled unconsciously into every emotional wave. You observe it. You feel it. And then you decide. This is conscious living. Where reaction becomes response. Where impulse becomes awareness. Where repetition becomes choice. And as this continues, your identity deepens into something more stable. You are no longer defined by temporary emotional states. You are defined by awareness itself. A steady presence beneath the fluctuations of thought and feeling. And from this presence, you begin to move differently in the world. Calmer. Clearer. More intentional. You are no longer scattered internally. So your external actions become aligned. You say what you mean. You do what you decide. You follow through without internal resistance. Because the conflict inside you has reduced. The old patterns that once pulled you in different directions are losing influence. Not because you destroyed them, but because they are no longer reinforced. They are no longer the dominant instructions. And so, they fade. This is how life begins to reflect the order you have created within. Not through force, but through alignment. You begin to notice opportunities differently. You recognize choices more clearly. You respond to situations with a sense of quiet certainty that was not present before. And even when uncertainty appears, it does not destabilize you in the same way. Because your foundation is no longer built on reaction. It is built on awareness. And awareness does not collapse under change. It adapts. It observes. It remains steady. This is why your outer experience begins to feel more structured. Not because everything becomes perfect, but because you are no longer contributing chaos from within. You are no longer feeding old emotional patterns into every situation. Instead, you are meeting life from a centered place. And that changes the quality of everything you experience. Even simple moments feel different. There is more presence, more clarity, more space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you live differently. You are no longer living on autopilot. You are participating consciously. And this participation is what creates alignment. Because when your inner state is consistent, your outer reality begins to stabilize around it. This is not imagination. This is psychological and emotional coherence. Your subconscious no longer contradicts your conscious intention. It supports it. And as this support grows, life begins to feel less like something happening to you, and more like something unfolding through you. You are no longer separate from your experience. You are part of its creation. And in this understanding, a deeper responsibility emerges. Not pressure, but awareness. Because you realize now that every internal shift, every repeated thought, every sustained emotion, is shaping what you experience externally. And this realization brings clarity. Not fear, but direction. So you become more intentional, more present, more aware of what you allow within your inner space. Because you understand now that your life is not random. It is responsive. And it is responding to you. There is no noise in mastery. No announcement. Only a deep, steady awareness that you are no longer controlled. The patterns that once defined you have dissolved into silence. And in their place, there is clarity, presence, and power. There is a kind of silence that does not come from the absence of sound, but from the absence of inner conflict. You may not notice it at first, because it does not announce itself. It does not arrive with intensity or emotion. It simply exists. And slowly, you begin to recognize it within you. That space inside your mind that once felt crowded no longer feels the same. The constant inner commentary has softened. The emotional turbulence has quieted. The urgency that once pulled your attention in every direction has faded. And what remains is stillness. Not emptiness, but clarity. A clear inner field where thoughts no longer collide with force. Where emotions no longer dominate your awareness. Where reactions no longer define your identity. This is the state you once imagined. But now, you are beginning to live it. And because it is subtle, you almost miss it. A moment where something that would normally disturb you does not. A situation that once created tension now feels neutral. A thought that once spiraled into emotion now dissolves quietly. And you begin to realize something profound. You are no longer inside the pattern. You are observing it. And in that observation, it loses its power. This is what mastery feels like from the inside. Not control through force, but freedom through awareness. You are not pushing anything away. You are simply no longer attached to it. And that detachment is not cold. It is calm. It is presence without struggle. It is awareness without reaction. And in this state, you begin to understand yourself differently. The person who once felt overwhelmed by thoughts is no longer the center of your experience. The thoughts may still appear, But they no longer define you. They move through your awareness like passing weather. And you remain unchanged beneath them. This is the silence where power lives. Not because nothing is happening, but because nothing is controlling you anymore. And this realization does not come with excitement. It comes with recognition. A quiet knowing that something fundamental has shifted within you. You are no longer operating from the same internal system. The old patterns, the automatic reactions, the emotional loops, the unconscious repetitions have begun to dissolve. Not through resistance, but through disuse. Because what is not reinforced naturally fades. And what is not fed loses strength. And now, your attention is no longer feeding the old structure. It is directed elsewhere. Toward awareness. Toward presence. Toward choice. And this changes everything quietly. You begin to notice that you are no longer easily pulled into emotional extremes. There is a buffer now. A space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you are free. Free to observe. Free to choose. Free to respond differently. And because you are no longer reacting automatically, your energy feels different. More contained. More steady. More directed. This is not suppression. It is integration. Everything you once struggled with is still part of your awareness. But it no longer leads your experience. It is observed. Understood. Released. And this release creates clarity. You begin to feel less mentally scattered. Less emotionally reactive. Less internally divided. And more whole. This wholeness is not something you created suddenly. It is something that emerged as your inner world became less chaotic. As the subconscious patterns were rewritten through repetition. Through awareness. Through emotional alignment. They began to reorganize themselves. And now, the mind that once felt noisy, feels structured. Not rigid. But ordered. Like a system that finally understands its own function. And in this order, power becomes natural. Not forceful power. Not reactive power. But quiet power. The kind that does not need to prove itself. Because it is already stable within. You no longer seek validation from your reactions. You no longer measure yourself by emotional intensity. You no longer confuse noise with meaning. Instead, you observe. You remain aware. And from that awareness, you act with intention. This is where life begins to feel different at its core. Not because external circumstances have changed, but because your relationship with them has. You are no longer inside the storm. You are the awareness watching it pass. And that awareness does not shake. It does not collapse. It does not lose itself. It remains. And in remaining, it becomes stronger. Not through effort, but through consistency. And as this state continues to deepen, you begin to trust it. Not as something fragile, but as something permanent within you. A quiet foundation beneath everything you experience. And from this foundation, you move through life differently. With less resistance. With more clarity. With deeper presence. You are no longer trying to manage yourself moment by moment. Because you are no longer fragmented. You are integrated. And this integration is what creates true inner stability. The kind that does not depend on external conditions. The kind that does not fluctuate with emotion. The kind that simply is. And as you live from this place, even ordinary moments feel different. There is more space within them. More awareness within them. More quiet intelligence guiding your responses. And you begin to understand that this is not an endpoint. It is a state of being that continues to deepen. The more you remain aware, the more it stabilizes. The more you observe, the more it strengthens. The more you return to stillness, the more natural it becomes. And now, you begin to see that silence is not absence. It is presence without disturbance. And in that presence, something within you continues to expand quietly. Not outwardly, but inwardly. Into deeper awareness, deeper stability, deeper control. Not over life, but over your experience of it. And that is where true power lives.